Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. What a great Friday show we've got for you. Second hour, Dr. Matthew Bunson will be here, and we're going to talk about the church in the news as we do with him on Fridays from time to time. And always there is news. If you got maybe a news story you want to ask him about, you can call. But if you don't, we'll just discuss the news. And I always have a great time talking with him. So hang around for that. This hour, she's back. She's a scientist. She's a theologian. Soon, well, in a certain sense, she's already a philosopher. I've got to update my introduction of her because when I introduce her as a speaker, I always say scientist and theologian, Dr. Stacy Trasancos, but now it'll have to be scientist, theologian, and philosopher. Stacy Trasancos, thanks for being here with us.
Hello, Cy. It's great to be back.
So you're the reason I say you're about to be a philosopher. Oh, by the way, if you want to call about faith and science, that's what we talk about with Stacy. So you're welcome to call. You don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be Christian. You don't have to be a believer of any sort. You don't have to know a great deal of science. Whatever. If you've got a question about science or faith, Stacy likes talking about both of them. 888-318-7884. So what is this about? Tell me about what's happening in your philosophy career now that you've mastered the worlds of science and theology. I'm sorry to say that. I know you like it if I say that, but what's going on in philosophy with you?
Yeah, I realized that I couldn't put chemistry and theology together until I learned some philosophy, because that's the language that St. Thomas Aquinas uses to explain theological truths and doctrines of the church. So I've just been lost, wandering around all these years of my life, and now I'm finally searching for the truth in philosophy. And I do feel very blessed to be able to do that, because I think using what I know from chemistry and what I've learned from theology, and to be able to put it together in a way really for scientists to be able to talk about their science in a way that jives with theology and philosophy is a very exciting prospect to me, because I know there's a lot of Catholic scientists out there, and I know they feel what I felt, that they're just like two different islands of knowledge, the science over here and theology and faith over here. And it is harder to put them together. You can always say God made everything, but that's just not enough. You want to explain nature a little bit more and understand our world more. So I'm excited to be doing this. It's a search for truth. I just don't want to die without crossing that bridge and figuring out how to put it all together, at least somewhat.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But so you're going to, or in your PhD, you're going to study matter. Now, as a chemist, you've studied matter. As a matter of fact, that's what you worked with, was the building blocks of matter, atoms and molecules.
Yeah.
So what are you hoping to get out of studying the philosophical side of matter?
Because a philosopher asked me what matter is, and I was like, what is matter? Is anything that has mass and takes up space? And he's like, that's not an answer. That's not what matter is.
That's a description, not a definition.
Yeah. We know how to measure it. We know how to talk about it quantitatively. We know it when we see it, but getting into the Aristotelian concepts of prime matter and elements and what elements are and blending, it's just really captured my interest, because it's not satisfying just to say matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. It's something God created, and I want to know more about it.
If you would like to know more about science or theology or faith and science in any way, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. 888-318-7884. She was once described by Forbes magazine as a geek. So that's correct. Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be awful if I just made that up. Because sometimes I do make things up and I don't realize I did. But that'd be awful if I just made that one up. A geek for atoms, a geek for molecules, and a geek for Jesus. A geek you just love it all. You just love studying it all.
That Trasancos represents a very rare bird, the scientist who did not cease to be a geek even after she got religion. I'm so flattered by that.
I think it is flattering. I think that's a great. There's something great about that, because I feel like being a geek for something in a certain way is having a certain innocent wonder at it. That you're not jaded, you're not cynical, and that's one of the problems with the world today. Is like a kind of unearned cynicism. Just like, nah,
Yeah.
I've watched a lot of Netflix. I know what everything's about, and it's very casual, unearned. I don't know another word for it. Cynicism.
Yeah. And I hear the apologists at Catholic Answers use that word a lot too. Like they like to geek out
Oh yeah.
on because Carlo Broussard says that a lot, and Tim Staples.
I'm just telling you right
and
now,
I-
when those two are geeking out, find somewhere else to be. It's a horrible experience. It's
I know I'm saying that. I'm like, you know what I'm talking about, totally.
yes, yes.
And,
I'm going to tell you,
it's
I've told them
cool.
both. Like one of my most terrifying experiences at Catholic Answers was being stuck on a plane with the two of them when they would not stop with the philosophical geeking out. I'm like, man, I'm just trying to watch a cheesy movie here. Stop. 888-318-7884 is the number. All right, let me ask you a basic question then, because I know that lots of people listening are not people of faith. Are you this just an example of, okay, sure, a Catholic discovering science, but you're a little late to the game. I mean, Catholics finally discovering science. Where were you in the Middle Ages? I mean, I know you
Yeah,
personally
right.
weren't in the Middle Ages, but you know what I'm saying. You get the idea.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
I stopped studying biology because I couldn't explain what was happening with the atoms. And so I switched my major to chemistry because it was a search for the first principles, the first truth, what's underneath all of this.
I'm sorry. I'll tell you what. We'll take a quick break and see if we can straighten it out. That's that old Texas internet. Stacy lives down in Texas. I'm sorry, Texas. It's not your fault. It's probably our internet here in California. But that we have to take a break because there's a little interruption in our connection with Stacy. Dr. Stacy Trasenko, scientist, theologian, philosopher, and geek, here to talk with you about faith and science. If you have questions about faith and science, and it's okay if they're challenging questions, if you don't share our beliefs, our faith. You're welcome here. We love talking about these things. If you're atheist or agnostic or maybe practice another religion or philosophy, or if you're a believer and you'd like to know something about the intersection of faith and science, anyone's welcome. As long as you want to talk about faith and science, pick up the phone and call 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
He is honored as a saint, monk, and the only English-born doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Bede entered a monastery in England as a child and spent almost his entire life there teaching and writing. He was perhaps the most learned person of his era, authoring biblical commentaries and the famed ecclesiastical history of the English people. He died in 735 and was named a doctor in 1899.
To find out more about the Doctors of the Church, visit EWTN.com and click on Catholicism.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and I want to invite you again to our Catholic Answers conference that is a month away. A month from today, we will be at the conference September 26th through 29th. It's at the Hyatt Regency La Jolla here in San Diego. CatholicAnswersConference.com is where you can go to find out all the details. I've been letting you know about it a lot, but I'll just remind you again that the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ is the theme. We're going to talk about the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. Well, that's a pretty good time. I'll tell you who's going to come talk about those things, though. Dr. Scott Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Kimberly Hahn, Father Sebastian Walsh, Dr. William Junker, and all of our apologist here at Catholic Answers. Find out all about it at CatholicAnswersConference.com. CatholicAnswersConference.com. Stacy, sorry about that.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We got you on the phone now, though, and I'm glad we do. Faith and science is our topic, and I don't even know where we cut you off in the middle, but you were telling us about matter, about your study of matter, and I asked you about, well, what about the person who says, oh, yeah, well, fine, you're a Catholic who's a scientist, but the Catholic Church is late to the game in science. But your answer surprised me on that. You were talking about your personal experience of science. You were saying you needed to know, you wanted to get to the basics, and so you started studying atoms.
Yeah. And so I started studying atoms, and then later, after I converted, I had the same attitude. I want to get underneath things. I want to understand why. And that's when I discovered Father Stanley Yockey's work about how science was born of Christianity. And I wrote a book about that because I wanted to get to the bottom of it and understand why. I understand now that the Catholic view of the universe, like as God created something good with rationality and intelligibility to us, that's all a necessary worldview to even be able to do science and have it make sense. Like you can go to work and put the lab coat on, whatever, but if you really want to understand your place in the world as a human person, who is doing science and what that all means and what it is that you're trying to do whenever you try to discover the mysteries of the universe, it requires what we pray in the first line of the creed, that we look at the earth as creation. And so now I'm just trying to find a way to take that back into physics, chemistry, and biology in a way that makes sense so that scientists who practice can also have a better understanding of what it is they do. And so people who don't know science can also understand what science is and maybe even become interested in it. So I've always loved atoms, and I think I love God so much because he made atoms.
Unless I'm mistaken, you're made out of atoms. Is that correct?
Made out of it. Yes,
oh, yeah, okay.
They make up everything.
I thought that was the case. One of the things that and I'm going to go to the phones in a quick sec, but I wanted to ask you about this because when you talk about science in that way, that as kind of searching for the fullness of truth and the basic building blocks of what's true and what's real, and that opens out onto questions about God. It doesn't close off questions about God. One of the things that I found striking in what you've taught me over the years is that students actually do better learning science when science is taught to them as the study of God's creation, because it's meaningful. They don't face the question, why are we studying this? Why are we doing this?
Yes, exactly. That's one of the most powerful things I've found in teaching. Like, I teach university classes, but I teach science. I teach physics and chemistry and mathematics to non-science majors. So they're very hesitant to even pick up a calculator, and they're afraid they can't do it. And that's one of the things I say that just puts their mind at ease. Like, you're not expected to remember every single thing about chemistry, but you're expected to encounter it, to encounter the formulas and encounter the order that's in this world. It's one thing to say that God created an ordered world. It's another thing to try to balance a chemical equation and determine rate laws from that. So, I mean, it just takes it to a whole new level. And I do think, and I've been told many times, that students walk away from that experience with a deepened faith, a deeper understanding of what it means to have faith that God really does have this. There's conform your will to God's will. God's got a plan. You can trust God to be faithful. He's holding all of your electrons and all of the orbitals of all of your atoms at this very moment in time. And it's a bigger view of what's going on around us, and I think it's very important to have that view.
Several callers on the line, still some lines open. If you'd like to talk about faith and science, whether you are a person of faith or not, you're welcome to talk about faith and science with our guest, Dr. Stacy Trasenko, scientist, theologian, and philosopher. 888-318-7884. I might just have to go back to scientist and theologian. That's a lot. I mean, all right. Let's start with Paul in Oregon. Paul, thanks for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy Trasenkos. Paul? Hang on, Paul. We're not going to let you go. I think there must be a mute somewhere in the equation. All right. We'll come back to you, Paul.
Okay.
We'll get you. But let's try this. Let's try Laura in North Carolina. We'll see how this one goes. And Paul, we want to get you back on the line, so don't give up. Laura, go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy.
Okay, I'm going and paving the way for Paul.
Yes, good.
So, hi, Dr. Stacy.
Hi, Laura.
I've only heard you a few times, so you might have addressed this already, and I missed it, but here we go. Decades ago, my chemistry teacher taught us the story of Kekulé discovering the structure of the benzene molecule by having that legendary dream of a snake chasing itself until it caught and swallowed its own tail. And I just wonder, does this fun anecdote have any biblical resonance for you, or is it merely scientific apocrypha alone?
I would say the latter. I mean, if he had a dream and he discovered it, there's all kinds of different explanations for having dreams. Certainly they can be angels talking to us or God trying to talk to us, but they can also just be our brains doing things. So I don't know the story about his dream, but Kekulé is the principal founder of the theory of chemical structure, and particularly, like you said, of benzene. So maybe there was something to it. I just don't think there's really much we need to make. It's probably just an interesting anecdote, but I don't think there's much that we need to make of it right now. Benzene has turned out to be a very important molecule in our understanding of how organic systems work. So he contributed a lot to the field for having discovering that there's a ring structure of carbon atoms instead of they're always linear or branched.
What do you think, Laura?
Well, I think that's fair enough, and though I have forgotten almost all my chemistry equations and formulas and everything, that benzene ring molecule story persists and will probably do so forever in my mind. Thank you for addressing that.
Thank you. Benzene's a really cool molecule. I mean, the way we think about it chemically is it's a ring of 6 carbon atoms. And there's double bonds holding them all together. And we think of them not as a double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, but we think of it as of electrons just kind of running around all of the bonds together, holding that ring together. And so it's a very important, stable structure in nature because of that. And it's a great example of how parts contribute to the whole, how the whole is different. You can't reduce the whole down to just the sum of the parts.
Laura, thank you for the call. I'm always delighted when we get to talk about benzene. It really is one of my favorite molecules as well. Of all the molecules, I love.
Thank you, Laura.
I love donut molecules. I love bagel molecules and benzene. Those are my 3 favorites. Laura, the number here is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. It seems to me, Stacy, that you want to study philosophy of matter. It seems to me like the hot philosophy is philosophy of mind. And like, what is the mind? Is the mind just a epiphenomenon? I love that word. Or is the mind, is it some kind of dualist thing with, which it is, by the way, soul and body? Have you done any of that? Have you done any, this seems to me another place where science and philosophy and theology are all just going to keep bumping heads for a while, the science or the philosophy of mind.
Yes, and the way I'm coming at it, so yes, I'm trying to get there. I want to get to talking about evolution. I want to get to talking about biology and also the philosophy of mind, like you're saying. But I'm trying to get there through matter first. And one of the most significant changes in the way I think. So I was a chemist before I became Catholic, and I never quite realized how much of a materialist I was. Like, you don't want to say that as a Catholic. You don't want to say that I think only the material world exists. I understand that there is matter and form, that we're body and soul, that the soul is the form of the body. I understand that. I just don't know. I can say it. I just don't know if I completely understand it. But one of the biggest changes for me in thinking about that and how to understand matter's not just floating around waiting for some spooky form thingy to come grab it and turn it into something, is instead of thinking of existing things from the bottom up, like it's just a collection of particles. I'm thinking about it more from the top down. So I'm understanding that God is the form giver. God has the form of things in his mind. And when God creates, the matter is disposed to the form. It's kind of like we pick the right matter to put in the bowl to make a cake. The matter is disposed to the form. So when you talk about our own brains and our bodies, the matter is disposed to the form, but the form of the human is to be, we have a rational soul. So there is some way where whatever perceptions we're taking in through our senses, like when you see a red apple, there are things going on in your brain that's analyzing the color red, from the wavelengths of light hitting your retina to the smells to the touch. And your brain is processing this as a perception, which goes into your memories, but at some point it informs our intellect. And so, what is that? How is that working? I mean, we can say it informs the intellect, but we're not really sure like what that means. So that's what philosophy is really good at. It dives into those really deep questions and gives us a way to try and understand it. But like I said, I think understanding what matter is underneath all of that first.
And there's work to be done there. It's not just let's recover what the medieval and ancient philosophers knew. That all of that can go in the blender with modern science, and we probably can make advances in our understanding of what matter is.
Yes, because a lot of times scientists who are not, they're not Catholics, they're not people of faith, they're not thinking about God created this world, they're not thinking about virtue and trying to get to heaven, they're not thinking about all those things, they're just thinking about science. And a lot of times they don't make good decisions about what experiments they're going to do, because they've already kind of got the conclusion in their mind ahead of them when they're designing the experiments. And so one way that philosophy and theology can guide science is to help ask the right questions and design the right experiments to answer them.
What a cool insight.
Yes, we need that. And I know scientists are like that because I did that.
All right, more calls. Elijah in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Welcome, Elijah. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy Trasancos. Elijah?
Hi, Dr. Trasancos.
Hi, Elijah.
I just have a question about intelligent design. So one thing I have a hard time with is that I see a lot of people considering intelligent design its own theory or like something that seriously contends as a supplement to Darwinian evolution theory. Do you see it as that? I feel like they raise good questions, and it's important to have good critical analysis of those questions. But I just feel like it's not right to put it as its own theory. But I also haven't read deeply into the arguments they put forward. So what do you think about that?
Well, if you look up some things I've written or you look in Particles of Faith, I've made it pretty clear that I am opposed to intelligent design theory. I've talked with Dr. Michael Behe before. There's a radio recording where we actually had a conversation. I wouldn't really call it a debate. I don't think you need something like intelligent design theory to convince people that God created the universe. I think that intelligent design theory is a lot like giving God a test, our human test, to see if he passes it, and then we can call it design. I'm much more comfortable, more in line with what Aquinas says in the 5 Ways. God created everything, and the more you understand about nature, the more you see that order, and it's pervasive. It's not just we find design here or there in biological systems or DNA. We find design everywhere, all the way down to the electrons in atoms and the quarks in atoms. That stuff is all very ordered. And so I think that there is design everywhere, and I don't see the usefulness of an intelligent design theory, because it sounds like to atheists we're just trying to, as Richard Dawkins said, sneak God in the back door. I'd rather just say, look, I'm Catholic. I believe God created everything, and I look at the universe as God's handiwork, and I study it, and lo and behold, we find order and goodness and humbleness because we don't know everything. I also disagree with intelligent design theory because it's too much anthropomorphizing God. It's too much pitching God as some external designer that it sounds like to me they think of God as walking through, and they can correct me. I'll probably get some emails about this. But their approach sounds to me like they think God is just walking through the universe and tripped over nature and decided to arrange some things in an orderly way. And then when we look at it, we're like, oh, look, there's design. But the way we understand it through Aristotelian natural philosophy and the way Aquinas understood it is there's intrinsic, internal design. It's not, God's not a tinkerer of nature.
Stacey, we got to take the break. Hang on. Well,
okay, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll continue on the other side. Hang on, Elijah. We just need a minute break. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Deepen your connection to the Church's holy days and seasons while you draw on the wisdom of the Church Fathers. Feasts of Our Fathers, the new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, is a treasury of history, prayers, insights, and lessons that will bring you closer to the earliest of Catholic traditions. Take your prayer life and your solidarity with the Church, past and present, to a new level. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers today at shop.catholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Special guest Peter Lee talks about suffering. That's Monday's topic on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations. And now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Yes, I said donut molecules are some of my favorite molecules. Dr. Stacey Trasenko's our guest this hour. We're talking faith and science. It always gets wild towards the end of the hour. Like everybody wants to call. And so you should probably get on the line now. There's just one line open at the moment. But if you've got a faith and science question, come at it from the science side, from the faith side, from the agnostic side, whatever you want. You're welcome to call and talk with Dr. Trasenkos, 888-318-7884. She's a chemist who's also got a couple other master's degrees, one in theology, one in philosophy. And so very ready to talk about these things. Elijah in Oklahoma City is on the line, and I'm sorry that I had to interrupt the conversation to go to the break. But Elijah, I wanted to come back to you. You had asked about whether intelligent design could be kind of a supplement to Darwinian evolutionary theory. Did you want to respond or follow up?
I just want to say I think you gave a great answer. And I think I know where to focus my reading and where not to. And before anybody is like, well, getting after you for not supporting that, I just want to say that I find it, I think what you were basically saying is that it's even more marvelous that the Lord could, from the Big Bang, create things like us without needing to constantly rearrange things and cause miracles. And there may be evolutionary miracles. I have no problem with that. But I do think that you can also appreciate that he makes our bodies and everything to work day after day without ever needing to do something extraordinary.
Yes, and it's even more amazing. You're so right. You're exactly right.
Elijah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Elijah,
for the call and for the question. And I just kind of following up on what Elijah said. I believe that I have understood you before to say the following, but you please correct me if I'm wrong. That if there were, he mentioned evolutionary miracles. Let's say, for example, like I don't know, the jump from one kind of carryout to the other kind of carryout. Like these actually required a divine intervention at some point. Mm-hmm. Then that wouldn't be a scientific question. That would be a historical question.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's exactly how I answered the Adam and Eve question. We don't know exactly what happened when Adam and Eve were in the garden. We don't know, and I think it's wrong to expect evolutionary science to ever figure that question out. And we don't have to rule out a miracle, so we shouldn't. It's just that we also can't say we know exactly what happened. I don't agree with attempts to say we know when certain miracles happened back then, because we don't know. So it's possible that God worked a miracle in the beginning of the human race, and however it happened, we're here now, and
we know He made us.
So much, yeah, and we know He made us. Nobody knows when a brand new human being pops into existence in his or her mother's womb either. Nobody knows that exact moment when it happens. The mother is probably the first to know, but that's amazing right there. We don't even know when we begin to exist. So
right. Elijah, I'll just recommend a book if you haven't gotten it. Dr. Trasenkos' book, Particles of Faith. I think that you will enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy that read. I'm going to keep moving to try to get other folks on with Dr. Stacy Trasenkos, scientist and theologian. Robert is in Southern Illinois, listening on the Covenant Radio Network. Robert, we're awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Trasenkos.
Yes, I have a rather short question that might bleed into other subjects. And it's the famous father of quantum theory, Max Planck, once said, everything postulates consciousness. Do you think panpsychism is a real thing?
That's a good and short question. Panpsychism, and I'll
could you define it?
Max.
I'm sorry, just because I think there's not me, certainly not me, but some people might not know what panpsychism is.
Do you want me to define it, or
yes.
How about?
No.
Okay.
Well, either one of you. Actually, I'm sorry, Robert. I didn't mean to exclude you. Anybody, but I think we do need a definition for people to know what we're talking about.
Okay.
Panpsychism. Go ahead, Stacey.
You go ahead.
Robert, would you please define panpsychism for us?
Panpsychism is that consciousness is inherent in all matter and or material.
Yes, and it's that doctrine or belief, I'm reading it because I have it in front of me, that everything material, however small, has an element of individual consciousness. So theologically speaking, that's not how we understand creation. That's not how we understand God creating everything. Now, Aquinas does say, and there are scriptures in the Bible that says God is in all things, but he's not in all things in that way, giving every element of matter an individual consciousness. It's close to hylomorphism in the sense that God is the form giver, and God, if we're going to create a table, if we're going to build a table using matter that God created, we have a form of it in our mind, and then we put the matter together in a way that fits the abstract form we had in our mind. God is doing that. That's how Aquinas explains it. God's doing that with all creation, but it doesn't mean that the matter itself has the consciousness. Rather, there's a creator. And so that seems like a small distinction, but when you think about the difference between that or even something like pantheism, which is the belief that the universe itself is God or a living organism, that is drastically, infinitely different from creation, which is the view that God is the creator of everything. So it keeps us from thinking that matter has its own mind. It keeps us from thinking that the world is a god, or deifying the world, or deifying nature. It keeps us clearly, even science in its place, as the study of God's handiwork. And so we don't agree with panpsychism or pantheism, but nevertheless, Max Planck's quote, and I've got the whole thing right here, he says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, to what you said, postulates consciousness. So what he's doing, I think, with not really knowing exactly what he's thinking, it sounds like he is seeing that there must be a creator, that there must be someone who gave the form to all of this that we see existing in nature, on planet Earth and in the universe. But he's just not saying it very well. He doesn't want to, I see this a lot, especially with the quantum mechanics, early people like Heisenberg and Oppenheimer. They don't necessarily want to say God created everything, but yet they see this mind at work in creation, and so they, rather than going bigger, they're trying to stay down at the particle level and just say there's consciousness in the particles, because it makes something. And let me tell you, when you're a chemist who doesn't believe, I've done that, I've been there, it's really hard to make sense of what you do, because every little thing you do depends on something existing besides you, something existing objectively that has this order you're trying to discover. And so it's the most natural question in the world to say, I wonder who created this. But if you want to avoid God, you can't let yourself go there. And so you just sort of put the blinders on and look down and do your work, but you never have a satisfying answer to the biggest why of all. So I think that's what he was trying to do, if I could just read his mind a little bit there.
What do you think, Robert?
Well, the Catholic priest, Father Richard Rohr, which I'm sure you're familiar with, he says that as opposed to pantheism, pantheism. Yes, thank you. Is the more correct way of looking at it. Would you agree?
I'd have to look at more at what he said. Panentheism.
Panentheism.
Yeah,
I'm not
I'd
sure
have
exactly
to
what
look
that
a little
means.
more. Yeah, I'd have to look at what he said a little more. I'm very careful to say anything other than creation, because it means a lot, and that's when it might sound good on the surface, but I'm really careful about that.
Robert, thanks very much. It is striking that I think we see this in the human personality again and again. The resistance to God makes us, in a certain sense, denigrate the human. That is, the most obvious thing in the world is that the human consciousness is unique in everything we know. And so in order to avoid the necessity for God to consciously be the creator and sustainer of the universe, we'll say, well, everything's conscious, which then ends up denigrating the human being.
Yes.
It takes away the uniqueness of the human being. So it's either God or you just can't have a unique and irreplaceable human creature.
Yes, and I mean, they don't realize they throw the baby out with the bathwater when they do that. And Werner Heisenberg especially did it. He's got a book called Physics and Philosophy, and he really goes to great lengths. I mean, he's the founder of quantum mechanics, and nobody can talk about what quantum mechanics means better than him. And he really tries to get into Aristotelian philosophy and understand what it means, but you can see it in his book. There's certain places where you can put your finger on the sentence on the page where it's almost like he sees God up ahead and turns back.
Yeah.
And he was a believer. He just didn't know how to talk about God in the context of his science. Or let me correct that. I don't think he was an atheist. I don't think he was ever perfectly clear about it. But you can see where they just turn around and say, oh, okay, we have to explain this in terms of matter, because they don't want to sound like they're invoking mythological explanations for their science, which I get. But you're not doing that when you're talking about Aquinas' 5 ways and creation and the way we look at nature. You're not doing that. But they feel like if they talk about God, it's going to discredit them as scientists.
Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. Robert in Southern Illinois, thank you for the call and the question. We have room probably to take 1 or 2 more calls given those on the line. We have to take a quick break, so a great time to call if you have a question about faith and science. 888-318-7884.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
What have you always wanted to know about the Vatican? Well, I'm your Vatican insider, and I answer that question when I bring you the news about the Pope, Vatican City, and I share insights and stories from a broad spectrum of church ministries.
Vatican Insider with Joan Lewis, Saturday night, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. If you love Jesus and you like benzene rings, this is the hour for you. We're talking faith and science. 888-318-7884. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. She's probably one of the few people who laughs at my jokes, which I appreciate. I don't think that actually speaks highly of you, Stacy, but it sure makes me happy. Lots of folks on the line, so back we go. Noah, right here in California. Noah, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank you.
Every single individual. My question for Stacy would be, with your knowledge and education, what can you explain or talk about the part where conception happens? There's also too, I saw that scientists looked into it and they saw a glow when it happened, like a light or something. So I don't know if you have knowledge of that too as well.
Yes, I do. I remember when that report came out. So first of all, at conception, so that we call it fertilization. I've heard people say, and I agree with them very much, we should never call that zygote a fertilized egg because it is a new human organism at that point. But the beautiful thing about fertilization, so I said a little while ago, nobody knows exactly when that happens except God. I'm talking about in the moment when it actually happens, like when the woman's sitting there and the sperm meets the egg and they fuse, their membranes begin to fuse, and then they start to combine their genetic material, and that zygote starts to divide and multiply exponentially. Nobody knows when that actually happens, but it does happen, and it's amazing. I mean, we believe at that same moment, that same instant, that as a special creation, God creates the human soul, and so there is a new human person at that moment, and the mother will probably, if she practices NFP, she'll probably know in a few weeks maybe, or maybe even a little bit sooner. But what happens in that moment is itself a process. So picture in the womb, the sperm is coming along the fallopian tube, and there's the egg that's ready to receive the sperm, and there's a competition, and one of them gets through. In that moment when it happens, that's still in time. And I have wondered myself, and we don't know, and I don't think there is a way to ever know, but there's so many chemical events happening at that moment. Like, what nanosecond does the new human pop into existence? What femtosecond? Like, you can keep parsing time as small as you want, And we don't know. At some point, it just happens. And the way we say it with our scientific language is that as soon as the sperm and egg membranes fuse, the whole unit is now acting as one. Once the membranes touch and start fusing, the chemical changes happen within the whole assembly now. And that whole thing, even though the DNA hasn't combined in the nucleus yet, it's still acting as one. And so if you try to push it as far as you can chemically, when does that new human first exist? As soon as the sperm and egg stop acting like sperm and egg individually and start acting as one, literally two become one. And that's as far as we can push it, and backing out from that, okay, what about the next day or when the heart starts to beat, all that? Yeah, there's long been a new human organism by that point. And if there's a human body, there's a human soul. And if there's a human body and a human soul, there's a human person. And so that's a beautiful teaching of the church, but I think also for some people it's a hard teaching because it means a lot of things about how we treat that tiny, tiny, tiny little human. Does that answer your question, though?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Noah, thank you very much for the call and for the question. We're talking faith and science. If you got a question where those two meet, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. But with just a few more minutes left in the show, let's go to Epi in Eugene, Oregon. Epi, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Trasancos.
Hello, doctor. Thank you for taking my call. There's a lot of activity taking place in a location you might be familiar with. It's the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland and France. I believe the Vatican actually has investments in this machine, and it's a particle physics machine or particle collider. I would like to get first of all, your thoughts on that. And second of all, the discoveries that have been coming out of this facility. The scientists have literally stated that they have found new forms of what they refer to as existence or matter that has a form of life to it. That's the best way I can paraphrase. And I'll go ahead and listen to your answer off the air.
Okay, I haven't heard that about having a form of life, but I would answer that the same way I did with the Max Planck question. The scientists may be seeing something that looks like properties of life, like growth and reproduction and change and responding to environment. So there may be some dynamism there, and that may be the way they're talking about it. But as far as that research goes in general, just like the churches, if they have an investment there, I don't know about that, but if you say that, I believe it. I believe that the church would have some kind of investment in that kind of research into the very recesses of matter and what these particles underneath particles do, that search for truly elementary particles that aren't made up of anything else. And so just in general, I think we should always support that kind of research. We shouldn't be afraid of what crazy things will be discovered, but we also, and I talk about this in Particles of Faith, we need to respect the scientists doing work like that, but we also need to be cautious about the language they use sometimes. So, and I don't mean that in any kind of condescending way towards the scientists. I have a lot of respect for scientists because they take data that nobody's ever looked at before, that they have gathered with their experiments, and they interpret it, and then they publish their interpretations, and they put their reputation on the line by doing that. And if they didn't have that kind of courage, we wouldn't have new discoveries. So I have a lot of respect for scientists, even ones who aren't faithful scientists, but I also don't take every single thing they say and call it gospel truth. And I know Catholics don't either, but I listen to what they say. I try to understand what they're doing. I try to be fascinated. I always maintain that awe and wonder, and just see what happens. Scientific discovery is a very, very slow process, and so it's not a straight line. There will be discoveries made and rescinded. There will be corrections to theories. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you or anybody else, you are totally encouraged to follow that and understand what they're saying. And I actually teach classes about how to do this well. but take what they say in stride. Like, no single scientific paper ever published rarely does it happen where it even changes paradigms. It's just one little atom, if you will, of research that's contributing to the bigger body of knowledge. So just understand our place in time, how these things are being discovered, and enjoy it. Enjoy what the scientists are saying and try to understand what they're doing.
Epi, I'm going to leave it there because I invited calls and I want to make sure I get everybody on. Gabe is in Texas. Gabe, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy Trasancos.
Hi. I've listened to Trent Horn before talk about abortion. Why should anybody take the position that the Catholic Church has an abortion and force it upon legislation?
Well, the Catholic Church doesn't just have positions on things for the sake of forcing it on. Actually, that's against Catholic teaching to force these things on society. But we're after the truth. The Catholic Church takes what was revealed by God in the life of Christ and tries to understand what it means for us. So why should anyone accept the Catholic position on abortion? Because it's the truth. It is the way to uphold human dignity for ourselves, for our families, in our relationships, in our marriages, in our communities, in our nations. And so if you're not leading the way with that absolute respect for all humans and their dignity that's inherent, if you're not seeing every single human that way, then there's a problem. There are going to be problems that come from that. And I know it's hard, and I know Trent talks about this a lot too. It's difficult because you have children conceived who weren't expected, and it makes a lot of demands on how we deal with that. It would be lovely to see a culture that embraced the Catholic teaching on life completely, because then, only then, could we actually see how that works out, what it's like when human dignity is respected to that extent.
Gabe, we have a minute. So did you have a follow-up, or is that answer acceptable to you?
Yeah, I mean, do you have empirically, objectively verifiable, observable, repeatable, testable evidence that your God is real before we take your position on abortion?
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that in 1 minute, but yes, it is more than just experience. It's more than just thinking there's some flying spaghetti monster out there because I need to feel better. There's a lot of intellectual thought put in the Catholic tradition into understanding what we mean when we say God, what we can know about God through reason, what we know about God because of faith and divine revelation, and putting it all together. And one of the biggest teachings is that humans have free will, and so we have to make a decision about what we believe. And I put as one evidence forward the satisfaction and happiness I saw in other Catholics and I found for myself, but that's just my personal experience. There's lots of arguments for the existence of God. And as a chemist, I would say, I don't know how you can look at atoms and how they form molecules and not believe there's a creator.
Gabe, thanks very much. You might, I'll be happy to send you some books, but you might check out Dr. Trasancos' book, Particles of Faith, which talks about at least gives some insight into her own move into as a PhD working for DuPont chemical chemist coming into the Catholic Church. But if you'd like it, I have a couple of books that I'd be happy to send you. We have a little booklet called Why We're Pro-Life, and I can send you that. Also, we have a book called Why We're Catholic. I'd be happy to send you that. And I'm very grateful for your call. Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate that. But we are at the end of this hour. Dr. Stacy Trasancos, I always enjoy the time with you. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you, Cy.
Are you already in your PhD program, or do you? Is that like it's coming up?
I fly to Ireland on September 14th to begin it, so I've got a little downtime right here. I just finished my master's, and I'm about to start the doctoral program.
I'm so glad to hear you have 15 days of downtime before you start another major academic endeavor. Good for you for taking 15 days of downtime. Spend some of it with your 7 children, your horses, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you, Cy.
All right, coming up, we're going to do the Church in the News. We'll talk about news stories with Dr. Matthew Bunson, who runs the news division for the EWTN Global Catholic Radio and Television Networks. And if you've got questions, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Right back with Dr. Bunson and the Church in the News right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Work week's over for me. I'm done because I just have fun talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson about the Catholic Church and the news around the world. His insights are, it's just fun to get to talk about all the stuff that's going on. So I'm not working anymore. This is an hour off for me. But I'll tell you what, I will do this work. If you want to call and ask about a story in the news about the Catholic Church or in which the Catholic Church is involved, I don't know, there's a lot of prepositions in that sentence. Just give us a call, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Dr. Matthew Bunson is Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And he's been doing this a long time. He's the author of a whole lot of books. I bet he doesn't even know how many books he's the author of. Dr. Matthew Bunson, thanks for being here with us.
Oh, great to be with you as always. So if you're not working and I'm not working, this is going to be an interesting hour.
Okay, good. Well, you're not working. You're just going to relax and have fun this hour?
Yes.
All right.
That's I always do. So.
Okay, good. Very good. Because you got your finger on the pulse, and I love getting to kind of pick your brain about what's going on.
There's a lot to pick. Not in terms of my brain, but in terms of news.
Well, yeah, there's never a shortage in the Catholic Church, and it's nice when it's good news, but that seems to be rare too. But I'll tell you what, I want the Shroud of Turin to be the burial cloth of Jesus. I have my strong suspicions that it is. I don't want to pretend like I don't know. I don't like to just dismiss science, but what's the news with the Shroud of Turin?
Yeah, it was very interesting the last couple of weeks, and since you're keen on the topic of the Shroud, you probably began noticing that there were stories that were percolating in the news, including one from Newsweek and several English publications. And it caught my eye, especially because I'm also fascinated by the Shroud. I'm fascinated by the relics of the Passion. I made a point at one point to visit the Habsburg Regalia in the Hofburg in Vienna just to see what is generally believed to be, according to long testimony, the Spear of Destiny, otherwise known as the Lance of Longinus. So that gives you an idea of its very interest. But the thing that was perplexing to us at EWTN News especially was that these stories had links at the bottom that seemed to go to articles that were at least 2 years old. And we reported on those. So the story kept going viral, especially in social media. So we sort of waited, and sure enough, after some additional investigation, what we found is that there is, in fact, a new set of studies that recently came out. And they're sort of based on some of the research that took place in 2022. But there has been some additional research from essentially the same group. It's the scientist from Italy, by the name of Liberato De Caro. He belongs to the Institute of Crystallography of the National Research Council in Bari, Italy. And they've been doing a series of new forms of X-ray dating techniques. And this is all based on the technology that really they began applying in 2019. And some of the findings are really quite striking. So if you're into like heavy academic journals, there's something called Heritage that has been sort of hosting all of these discussions. But essentially, they're able through this new X-ray technology to look at blood stains, scourge marks that were found on the Shroud. And it's really pretty interesting stuff because it does seem to do two things. First, it gives us new evidence for the real potential that this is genuinely from 2,000 years ago. The other is that it stands in stark contrast to some of the reports that are often cited from years back in the 1980s, for example, that seemed, or at least the claim was made at the time, that they had debunked the Shroud, that the bits of cloth that they examined were too late, or some of the pollen wasn't right, that sort of thing. So it has really opened up, I think, a new door, at least, into not so much speculation, but to additional research. And what I'll leave this note, that the more we study of the Shroud using the highest forms of technology, the more perplexing it is, but the more and more evidence does seem to point that this is at least from the time of our Lord's death. and resurrection.
That's such a big deal because I remember the studies when they came out. There was a kind of, I mean, you know, for those of us who are advocates of a kind of like, you know, it like because the carbon dating. I think that's what they did was carbon dated, and it seemed pretty dispositive. Like it didn't seem to leave a lot of room for, well, maybe they were wrong.
Yeah, well, partly because I think there was a mindset, at least going in, that this can't be real. So what are we going to do with this? We know as well, looking back, that some of the samples that were taken, I'll leave to Father Robert Spitzer, who's a scientific genius, far more than I could ever be, to get into the scientific minutia of this. But there were serious questions raised about where they did the sampling on the shroud. And the closer you get into the depiction of our Lord, and you're actually able to look at some of the blood samples and other things, the more compelling the case becomes. And again, as we look at the most recent scientific evidence, at the very least, it becomes increasingly compelling. Now, the question, well, two questions are still going to be there. The first is, what is the dating of this? We're zeroing in on a lot of that. The evidence now increasingly is that this is much older than some of the recent decades of findings would indicate. In fact, again, this is very consistent with the cloth and other elements that date back 2,000 years, again, mid-1st century AD. But the other question that we always come to is this in fact the actual burial cloth of our Lord? And the one question we can continue to really study and ponder and weigh in on scientifically, but the other is always going to be something of a question. And that's, I think, where so much of the fascination comes in. But also, then we have to look at the history of it, the provenance of this burial cloth. And is it consistent with the testimony of history and certainly the testimony of the Gospels? And the answer to both is, based on the evidence we have, yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's just fascinating. It's fascinating that it came back up, and that there's a reason why it's coming back up. And I look forward to finding. I feel like maybe I can have a little more. Like I didn't want to be in the position, and maybe you'd agree with this. I don't know that, but of dismissing what looked like hard science. Like you don't want to be like I have faith.
Right.
You know, like science has a purpose. If there's a reason for it. If it tells you one thing, then okay. But it never sat quite right. It didn't seem right from the beginning. So,
well, this is one of the reasons why, too, the church has always been so very careful about certainly a relic like the shroud. And we have things like the Veil of Montepello. We've got the Sudorium of Oviedo. We have the Lanso Longinus. These are very notable, significant, important relics. But let's also remember that the church has not rendered any sort of a formal declaration relating to the shroud. But when we read the testimonies, for example, and the reflections of popes, I go back especially to Benedict XVI and his visit to the shroud, and when he talked about what it depicts is very important to us, and it therefore becomes an opportunity for us to reflect on our Lord, on his passion, his death on the cross, his burial, and his resurrection. So it is always something that points us to something. And that, too, I think, is very important for us. But it also points, one of the reasons I've been so fascinated by this over the last weeks is because it has been accompanied by some recent efforts on AI to generate images based on the shroud. I don't know if you saw any of these.
I have not seen that, no.
So remember a couple of years ago, we had various scientists trying to render what Christ would have looked like, at least in their theory.
Right.
And the way they went about it, I don't want to be too dismissive of the scientists, but basically they dug up they looked at some of the skeletal remains from the region of what would have been first century Palestine, and then simply extrapolated, well, based on these, this is what we think Christ would have looked like. Well, it was unflattering to be charitable. It just didn't, to use the phrase that you just did, it didn't sit right with so many of us. It's like randomly picking someone from a graveyard in Virginia and declaring that that's what George Washington looked like. So
that's
these
funny.
are based on 3D renderings from the shroud itself. If we accept as a starting point for discussion, certainly from the AI depiction side, we're able to render some really striking images. And the thing that I keep coming back to, and a number of people have commented on as we look at these images, is how much they look exactly like all of the depictions of our Lord throughout history, especially from the earliest times of the depictions of him in Christian art. So it's a helpful reminder that technology, science is really important, but so often it really helps us to reflect more fully on the object of that art and that reflection, and that's Christ.
Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. If you have questions about the church in the news, he's the guy to talk to. He is the vice president of for the news division over at EWTN, and you are welcome to call with your questions. 888-318-7884. We got to take the first break. More fun to come right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
You don't have to go about becoming Catholic in the most obnoxious way possible. You can aim at the least obnoxious way possible. You have to say, I love you, and I want to do everything possible to make your life pleasant and easy and wonderful. But you have to understand that if I don't follow my conscience, then I'm not going to be a good husband and father. In order for me to love you rightly, I have to love God first.
Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Tonight, 11 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. One, I think, legitimate complaint you can make about when we have Dr. Bunson on is I monopolize the conversation, so I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to start with a caller, and you're welcome to get in the queue, and we'll get your question on for Dr. Bunson. We're talking about the church in the news today, 888-318-7884. Sydney is in South Bend, Indiana, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Sydney, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
Hello, Dr. Bunson. My
Hello.
question is, how does the church, how does the church see its role at present regarding the conflict in Israel? This really concerns me deeply.
Yeah, this is a really significant topic. I'm glad that you brought it up because certainly as we've seen in the last year, or we're now fast approaching the one-year anniversary of the October 7th atrocities on the part of Hamas, the role of the church, I think, has been really cast into some pretty remarkable light. When we think of what the church is trying to do in the Holy Land, I think it's a twofold reality. The first is the diplomatic side that exists both on the ground, but certainly on the side of the Holy See. That's why we have seen efforts on the part of the Secretary of State, speaking on behalf of Pope Francis, I think in particular of Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who's the Vatican Secretary of State, to at least be available for discussions on things like ceasefires and other things. Pope Francis, especially in the early going, spoke quite a bit, sometimes not without controversy, about the conflict. But then we have the on-the-ground reality, which is sometimes forgotten. I think in particular of his beatitude, Pier Battista Cardinal Pizzaballa, who's the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, who has spoken, I think, so eloquently about the situation there, working together also with the heads of all of the different Christian churches in the region too. Let's not forget that caught in the crossfire of so much of this the war are Christians. So I think especially of the Christians in Gaza who have one parish there, and that is a parish that has been hosting now for quite some time a very, very large number of refugees and people who've been displaced by the fighting. So the school that exists there, for example, is obviously no longer functioning, but it's become a kind of hospital and a kind of place where they can go with some hope of finding medical care, but also food and other things. So on the ground, I'll go back to Cardinal Pizzaballa has to walk a very fine line between the Israeli government that is trying to execute what it sees as a fully justified war against Hamas, and the Palestinian people who are caught themselves in many ways in a crossfire between the Israelis and the terrorists who have essentially taken complete control of Gaza and have now for many years, and have used it as the base for launching attacks into Israel, certainly as we saw on October 7th. What are the prospects for peace? Right now, we'll just have to see. It's clear that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu wants to try to execute this to some sort of a conclusion, to exterminate Hamas. Whether they can withstand the international pressure for some sort of a ceasefire, we'll have to see.
Does that get at what you were looking for, Sydney?
Yes, Dr. Bunson, you are so knowledgeable. I appreciate it so much. And I should add here, this is a completely somewhat of a non sequitur. When you were the co-host for Al Cresta, you did such a beautiful job. And
thank you very much.
We're still we miss him, right? But
we do. I miss him every day. He was a great friend, but it just losing him made all of us a little dumber.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
And I will have to put a plug in for Marcus Peter, who's taken over the show. It's now Ave Maria in the afternoon, and he's doing a terrific job for Ave Maria, and it's a show that I have the privilege of being on at least once a week to talk about news. And he's doing a very fine job, and especially in the light of the fact that he had such enormous shoes to fill.
Yeah, right. And having the good sense to come in and not try to be an imitation of Al, but be himself. I think that's right. That speaks very well of him. Thanks very much for the call. Let me ask you about a couple of things. One, a kind of disturbing article that in the Register on Africa, and a kind of an evangelization, I guess, of Africa, not by the church, but what the bishops are calling missionaries of evil. What's going on in Africa?
Yeah, that's right. Well, here we have Francis. I know we definitely want to talk about this, that Francis will be heading off to Asia, but one of the areas of big concern for him for many years throughout his pontificate has been Africa. And one of the phrases that he has used very frequently is ideological colonization. And what he means by that is this idea of where we had in the past imperial colonization from the major powers in the world who would impose their various policies and ideas of economics and strip mining and everything else. One of the things that we're seeing now are Western governments, Western secular regimes in many ways, intellectually certainly, who will come into Africa and offer aid and development and technology, but in return for embracing the whole of what Pope St. John Paul II, of course, would call the culture of death. What does that mean? It means like normalization of homosexual activity. It means embracing same-sex marriage. It means embracing the whole LGBTQ agenda, or what Pope Francis also calls gender ideology. It means embracing contraception and sterilization, as well as, of course, the crown jewel for this sort of ideological colonization, which is the embrace of abortion. And so we're seeing a real counter-reaction to that on the part of African leaders, but especially on the part of the African Church, because they see the impact that this has had in the West, and they're also starting to see some of the same impact in Africa. So There are various phrases that they use, and one in particular is Archbishop Renatus Leonard Mkawande of Tanzania. And he said, it's as though the West is sending missionaries who went all over to evangelize. He said, but in this case, the West is sending us missionaries of evil. And it's a very vivid description, but it's one, certainly I think that the lived reality for so many people in Africa is exactly that. They really are they're zealous, they are determined, and the biggest concern that we should have, certainly as a church, but also as defenders of sort of authentic family life and everything else, is they have almost unlimited amounts of money.
Where does the money come from? Is it foundations?
Yeah, it's foundations, NGOs. We know that the UN is a big supporter of the sort of ideological colonization. I think of Melinda Gates's foundations, the George Soros's foundations, all of them. It's tied not just to ideology, but there's this idea too of how you go in and acquire land for, let's just say, I'll hold this up. My cell phone, your cell phone, require a lot of elements, and they're very precious and they're hard to get to. And so they are acquiring as much of Africa as possible. So there is a kind of, not an arms race, but an elements race. It's a natural resources race with, for example, the People's Republic of China. That is building whole communities of Chinese laborers in Africa as we speak, that are leveraging their program of the Belt and Road, where they offer huge loans to African countries. And of course, the terms seem very promising at first, but then the terms become onerous, impossible ever to repay. More leverage falls into the hands of the Chinese, and then they're able themselves to influence even further and acquire even more of those resources. And then we have the other aspect from the West, which is simply looking at Africa in much the same way that many of the old imperial powers did too.
Right.
These are HRRs, human resource rich territories. And they are there as far as so many of these organizations and corporations as there to be exploited. But part of it, too, is how we control them with messaging, with, again, that use of technology. You know, I've been in Africa. You can find cell phone towers everywhere. And cell phones, let's just say, for many of the people in Africa are just not a good thing, as we're discovering in the West to our own peril.
Yeah, right. It's like it's almost like we've brought our society down to this level where families don't work and children are desperate and suicide and addiction are rampant, and we'd really love to share that with you.
Yes, exactly. And we and not only do we want to share it with you, we're going to make you
right
share it with us. On pain of receiving no aid or development or the technology or basic medical care, that sort of thing. Uganda, I think, has been a really good example of that in recent years, where you can see very consistently the UN and various NGOs and foundations attaching very clearly ideas of development, prosperity, or hope for prosperity, to things like contraception and the whole LGBTQ agenda.
It does remind me, because I'm old enough to remember the 1970s panic about overpopulation and how this was sold, like the Ford Foundation and Rockefellers and others, going around the world sterilizing people and destroying family structures in whole communities. And they thought they were doing a good thing. I mean, it turns out the whole basis of it was nonsense, that there was no population bomb, we know that now.
Well, and now we're facing the exact opposite, in which whole parts of the world are going to be facing depopulation. We do not have replacement populations in North America and in Western Europe, and so they want the same type of approach to civilization to be embraced as well. So it all fits together in so many different ways with the abortion movement, with the contraceptive movement, with the LGBTQ movement. So it's something that the bishops of Africa the priests of Africa and so many of the lay faithful in Africa are so aware of. And it's funny, isn't it, how it always comes down to the domestic church, how so much of the focus is on the obliteration of what would typically be termed the nuclear family. That once you can begin to get rid of that, so many other things are horrifyingly possible.
Have you heard I mean, I've talked to some bishops who tell me they can't get African priests to stay in the United States because the U.S. government keeps kicking them out. Like, they won't renew their visas to stay here.
That's, I'll leave that, I'll leave the shroud to Father Spitzer as a scientific expert. I'll leave to immigration attorneys to the details on that. But the U.S. bishops are very much aware of it and actually had a presentation on it in June at their bishops' meeting.
It's a weird world we live in. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. A whole bunch more to talk about, including Eucharistic congresses, what's going on in Nicaragua. Maybe we'll talk about Ukraine a little bit. Or you can call and ask your questions, 888-318-7884. What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Check, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast to visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today.
Special guest Peter Lee talks about suffering. That's Monday's topic on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations. And now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Our guest is Dr. Matthew Bunson. If you enjoy the news, and there is much to enjoy on EWTN and National Catholic Register and all those related outlets, he's the guy that's running all that, and with a lot of wonderful people. And I've said before, and I will say again, I do think that the investment EWTN has made in news has paid off, and it's a real service. I mean, it's obvious that news media are dysfunctional. And just like to talk about Africa in that way. I don't care if it's conservative media or liberal media or what. Nobody but EWTN is going to talk about Africa that way. Nobody is going to tell you what's really going on in Africa.
Well, no, I appreciate it. And at first, I have to say that you're completely right. I cannot stress enough how blessed we are with the reporters, the producers, the editors who work every day at EWTN News. I have the privilege of working with pretty much all of them all over the world. And it's that commitment to Mother Angelica's vision for news that we need to be in that space.
Yep.
It's obviously a huge investment to be in that space, especially if you're going to be growing globally. But part of it too is, to your point, that having that awareness, not just of what's actually happening in a place like Africa, but then to be able to report on it in a way that actually does justice, both from the professional journalistic standards, but to have an understanding then of the ramifications for the human person.
Yep.
That's why Catholic social teaching is so crucial to effective Catholic journalism.
Wonderfully said. All right, let me ask you about the one that I'd like to get to. Ukraine outlawing a religion. Which, first of all, I have to say,
it's an interesting way to put it, but yeah.
Take whatever position you want. That right there rankles immediately with me, and it apparently rankles with the Pope as well. So,
yes, it does.
The two of us, as keen observers of our times, me and Pope Francis, what is going on with a religion in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, it's in order to discuss that, first we have to be realists in understanding the complicated situation that exists within Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. Because you can't have a conversation, unfortunately, and I know we only have an hour, to look at the situation facing the Ukrainian or the Orthodox churches in Ukraine. So it starts with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which really has worked very hard and wants to be independent, removed from any influence of what is the largest numerically, and one would say by influence, the Russian Patriarchate of Moscow. And they are in control of what would be the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And this, obviously, as you can imagine, has been the source for a long time of dispute and unhappiness. And it has divided the Orthodoxy to the point also where the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, has weighed in. He has striven very hard to help the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to have that independence. But as this war has dragged on, the Ukrainian government has also grown concerned about the influence and presence of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And to that, a ban has been placed. It was passed just a couple of days ago. It's been in the works now for, some time, about a year or so. I think we first started reporting on it back then. That bans the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukrainian territory. Now, in fairness to how some of this has been reported, it's not really quite accurate to say that they're banning a religion.
Okay.
But what they are doing is essentially removing it because, at least as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, that the Russian Orthodox Church has become and exists in many ways as a part of the Russian state. And the close ties that have existed for a very long time under the government of Vladimir Putin with the Russian Patriarchate of Moscow is itself the cause of great unhappiness to people, not just in Ukraine, but elsewhere. Now, having said all of that, Pope Francis came out firmly against this new law, for the very simple reason that I think you alluded to, that it does smack of banning a religion. And Pope Francis, in his Angelus just a couple of days ago, his Sunday Angelus, talked about the fact that it really is a violation of religious freedom, and that it is not appropriate that any church, let alone a Christian church, should be abolished, as he put it, directly or indirectly. You don't, as he put it in that classic Francicism, you don't touch the churches.
Yeah.
And if you have a problem with the Russian Orthodox Church, I'm loosely paraphrasing what Pope Francis is talking about, there are ways that you can solve that. You don't necessarily have to be banning it. Now, we can add another layer of complexity that the support for this bill within Ukraine is pretty significant, up to and including what would be the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which is headed by a very significant figure and a very remarkable figure throughout the whole Russian invasion of Ukraine, because of the stalwart courage that he and the members of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church have displayed, because really they're I wouldn't say that they're disliked by both sides, but I mean the reality is that the Greek Catholic Church has suffered so devastatingly over the years. The Major Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk has spoken out in favor of this new law because, as he said, that the Russian Orthodox Church is, as far as he's concerned, a tool of militarization on the part of the Russian government, and that the ties between the Russian Orthodox, the Patriarchate of Moscow, and Vladimir Putin's government is just too close. And so he sees this as necessary. So not only has this war sparked divisions, very serious divisions, long-standing as they are, within the Orthodox world, it has now also created a bit of a tussle between the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and Pope Francis.
The Pope. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, war does that. I mean, war has consequences that just radiate out and out and out into areas of, okay, two things I would say. One, I mean, the fact that the Russian Orthodox in Ukraine is very, very unpopular
that's fair.
Is actually, it seems to me, one of the reasons why the principle must be invoked, that just because you're unpopular doesn't mean people get to tell you can't pray in your church.
That's right.
Do you see what I'm saying? That's where the principle needs to be. Like, we don't have to speak up for popular churches. We have to speak up for unpopular churches.
Yes, right. And there's a recognition, too, that there are huge issues at play in this discussion. One is the influence, the longstanding influence of the Russian Orthodox Church, the complexity of its relationship with Vladimir Putin. You know, Putin has developed very close ties with the Russian Orthodox, partly because, as any historical-minded person who knows about Russia, and I make no claim to be an expert, but certainly an awareness of Russian history, that the appeals to nationalism, the appeals to Mother Russia, under the Soviets, you had the appeal to communism, to the valor of the Red Army, and certainly it was valorous in its wars against the Nazis of the Third Reich in the Second World War. An instrument, ultimately, of course, of communist Bolshevik oppression under Lenin and Stalin and all of that. But there was this appeal to Mother Russia of patriotism. Let's remember that when things became very dire, especially in 1941, when the Nazis invaded and seemed poised to capture Moscow, Stalin, in a desperate effort to maintain the morale of the Russian people, allowed, at least temporarily, some of the churches to open and to reopen.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's a recognition of the real role of the Orthodox Church in Russian history and among the Russian people and the Russian culture. That extends at the same time to the reality of what would be sort of the Russian sphere. And does that extend, certainly as far as the Russians are concerned, does that extend to Ukraine? Yes, it does. Does it extend as far as the Ukrainians are concerned? No, it doesn't. And so that's also playing out in this whole discussion. But you have to ask that question. Can you simply suppress a church of such long standing in a region because it's caught up in the middle of a war?
Yeah. And right, but I'm glad that you give at least a beginning insight into the complexity of it, because the levels of, I mean, we're talking about a very old society that's been doing this for a long time, and I don't think an American could begin to grasp all the levels of it. I mean, or maybe we could just begin to grasp
it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And Putin himself has made a lot of appeal to Russian Orthodoxy, to Orthodoxy itself, that Russia, and that's a very broad conception, must stand, as far as he's concerned, as a bulwark against the very thing that we were talking about before the last break, and that is things like ideological colonization.
Yeah.
So one of his accusations, fair or not, against the Ukrainian government, Vladimir Zelensky, is that it has embraced so much of the West's, what certainly Putin would describe, fair again or not, of the toxic Western culture and toxic Western ideology. And at least it was an excuse given, right or wrong, for the invasion of Ukraine.
Yep. Yeah, and that there is a problem when the church divides. It tends to get associated with nationalism. The universal church it tends less to be nationalistic. I mean, one of the complaints Napoleon had about Pius, I think it was the 7th.
Yes.
Like that he doesn't do what I tell him to do. I mean,
yes,
I'm the emperor, and
which
so,
is one of the reasons why he seized him and made him a prisoner in Fontainebleau for a while.
Right, but the like even in the United States, I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that we have problems with churches that the flag and the cross are virtually equal values, and they are not equal values. They never can be equal values.
Right. And if we begin to blur that on both sides, both of the far right and certainly the far left, where certain Christian denominations in the United States, some would argue, are far too closely tied to certain left-wing ideologies. You can see that pretty plainly in some churches. Putin himself, as I was going back to my comment about Russian history, understands that the Russian Orthodox Church can provide, certainly religion can provide an important glue for a country. Yep. And that, unfortunately, also means it can be open to very clear manipulation.
Right. Very well said. Just for the younger listeners, the reason we didn't beep Dr. Bunson is he said Bolshevik. I know what you thought you heard, but he said Bolshevik. All right, right back with more Church in the News right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Hi, I'm Debbie Georgiani. Adam Bly and I invite you to join us as we tackle the spirit world on EWTN Radio. Adam has assisted at thousands of solemn exorcisms and resolutions of hauntings. He also reaches out to educate people on the paranormal and the occult in our culture. Join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern for the Spirit World on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest from all the different EWTN news outlets. And we'd love to talk with Dr. Bunson about the church in the news. I'm just going to tell you something about the Pope that I don't think the Pope realizes. He's too old for international travel. What's he doing? Stay home. But once again, he's off. He's they show him on TV, and you're like, oh my goodness, he can hardly get on a step, and then he gets on a plane and goes, I don't know, where's he going now?
Well, he's about to embark on Monday on what is the longest papal trip of his pontificate.
Wow.
It's the longest because he'll be traveling from the 2nd to the 13th. And it's the longest because he's flying 20,000 miles.
Good Lord.
Basically he's traveling 20,000 miles to Southeast Asia. So he has 4 stops that he's planning to make. The first is to Indonesia. The second is to Papua New Guinea. And the third is to Timor-Leste, commonly known as East Timor. And then a final stop before he heads home to Singapore. And it's an immense undertaking. And you're right, he's 87 years old. It's the first international trip he's taken since last year. And that was a fairly modest one, as I remember, to Marseille. So he's, I'm guessing, rested up. He is planning to do this. And he is very committed to it. Now, we can talk about the destinations and some of the wider strategy, I think, that's at work here.
I got to say, Indonesia is an interesting choice. Indonesia's, I think, the least well-known major country. I mean, it's a big country, Indonesia, a huge population, predominantly Muslim country, but not, at least to my understanding, not an Islam that's very much like the Islam you find in say Saudi Arabia or other parts of the Middle East. Why is he going to Indonesia? What's he going to do there?
Yeah, well, you've hit on something that I think is really important to understand here. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. It has 290 million Muslims in that country. Catholics make up 3% of the population. But, and this is the other really important point that you just made, and that is that this is what is often described as a different kind of Islam. The Islam in Indonesia, now, let's be clear that there are certainly many places in Indonesia where Christians have been under attack, where they have faced persecution, where certain provinces have restricted Christianity. So it's not like all, as I think it was Georg Ratzinger once said, happiness, joy, and pancakes. But there is a very clear effort on the part of the Indonesian government to have religious harmony, for Christians in particular and Muslims to live together peacefully. And in some ways, the emblem of that is that you have side by side in Jakarta, which is the first stop for Pope Francis, two major places of worship. So we have the Catholic Cathedral, and you have what is, I believe, at this point, one of the world's largest mosques. They can hold tens of thousands of people. They are right next to each other. And just recently, the Indonesian government built what is called the Tunnel of Harmony. And it connects the two. And Catholics and Christians are welcome in the mosque. Those who are in the mosques are welcome in the churches. Obviously, we have all the usual restrictions in terms of who's allowed to worship and all of that. Mm-hmm. But a real effort has been made on the part of the Indonesian government to foster that, in large measure because they do not want happening in Indonesia what we're seeing on a daily basis now in places like Pakistan and obviously Afghanistan and elsewhere.
Right.
Pope Francis is going to highlight that. And he has made interreligious dialogue such a major pillar of his pontificate that this, I think, is going to be an opportunity for him to reflect on that and to talk about this is a place where that works.
Oh, so he wants to highlight their success is what he's showing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah. And so that's why I think it's one of his first stops. Now, there are about 40 different events that he's going to. He's going to be saying Mass. He's going to be meeting with the imams of Indonesia, the government of Indonesia. And the Indonesian government itself is at some pains to really be stressing this level of harmony. We hope that it lasts.
Right.
But it builds also on Francis's, remember, he's visited these major Islamic centers in the last years. And one of the phrases that I've been using in some of our coverage is that if we're thinking about this trip, the word microcosm. This whole trip basically is a microcosm of the 11-year pontificate of Pope Francis. In Indonesia, he's talking about interreligious dialogue, of harmony, of fraternity, which is one of those big words that he likes to use. When he's in a place like Papua New Guinea, he's going to be talking about peace, because they've had tribal conflicts, but he's also going to be talking about that ideological colonization that you and I just discussed. When he goes to East Timor, which is technically the most Catholic country in the world, 98% of the country is Catholic.
Wow.
Some would joke it's actually more Catholic than the Vatican.
Is that a joke? I'm not sure.
I'll leave that to you.
All right.
But and it's one of the youngest countries in the world because it gained its independence. A vote was held 25 years ago for its independence from Indonesia, and it achieved it. But at the same time, Francis is going to go there talking about the impact of what Francis calls climate change, but also sustainable development. What is real sustainable economic development and an awareness of care for God's creation. Then when he goes to Singapore, which stands in really stark contrast to all three of the other places, Singapore is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. It is one of the tigers of the Asian economy.
Yeah.
But it is also one of the most remarkable places I know because I love going there. I have in-laws who live there, and we were just there in April. It exists in one of the most striking forms of religious, economic, and ethnic harmony of almost any place you'll ever visit. So Francis wants to highlight that. that this is possible, and it is possible for people to live in fraternity, to live in harmony with each other.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So can we watch it on EWTN? Like, what will the?
Yeah. So we will be carrying all of the major events of Francis's trip. We're going to have a lot of people on the ground. In fact, tonight on EWTN News in Depth, we have a preview of it that our redoubtable and indefatigable journalist Colm Flynn traveled all 4 of the countries, and so he's giving a profile of what Francis is flying to. Same time, though, tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, EWTN News in Depth. And so we've had, on the show, we had discussions about exactly that. What is Francis doing? Why is he going? Asia is really important to Francis, and it has been. This is his 6th trip to the Far East. He's done about 16 trips overall to what would be considered the Near East and the Far East. But he has had a lifelong interest in Asia, and I think it stems from 2 things. One, as a young Jesuit, he wanted to be a missionary. It was never realized. He wanted to go to Japan, for example, given the great Jesuit tradition, Francis Xavier. But he also recognizes that in China, we have one of the fastest growing Christian populations anywhere in the world. That's why he's so engaged with China. He wants to have those diplomatic relations. But he also recognizes that Asia is one of the fastest growing centers in the world for Christianity. It's still a tiny percentage of the overall population of the 4 billion. But when you look at it, it's maybe 3%, but the numbers are growing exponentially. It has quadrupled in population just since 1960 across Asia.
Yeah.
And that means that the church is going to be playing a more and more significant role. You can see that already in places like India. You can see that, I just said, in East Timor, where the president of East Timor, who's a Nobel Prize winner, Horta, made the comment that he does not think that East Timor would be independent today from Indonesia had it not been for the work of the church in providing them with the kind of safety net that the church does, that made it possible for them to be free of Indonesian control.
And when he goes to, and I would assume that then he goes to East Timor, everybody will come out. But what do they expect for crowds in Indonesia?
They're going to be very large. John Paul II, I think, was there, if I'm remembering right. I could be mistaken, but I think it was in 1989 that he went to Indonesia. So this is not the first time. This is not unprecedented, but the turnout is expected to be very high. Because of the millions, I think 7 million Catholics or so are very invested in seeing Pope Francis. But also, again, this is something that the Indonesian government really wants to highlight. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to build a harmonious culture where there's mutual respect and trust of each other, you want to do everything you can to have a high turnout, not necessarily for the Mass that's going to be celebrated, but certainly for the visit of the Pope through Jakarta and elsewhere. And then we're going to have the classic images of Pope Francis visiting places where they care for the terminally ill, of forgotten and neglected children. Things, too, that governments want to highlight, that the church is providing care for these poor people at a time not necessarily embarrassing governments, but the government can point to that and say, see, this is the care that we support, and this is the kind of care that we encourage, and Pope Francis is going to be highlighting that, as he always does.
And you'll have report. So will we have to see it in the middle of the night, or how like will it be middle of the night?
We'll be doing if you go to EWTN.com, you can see the whole schedule. So it's going to be an interesting juxtaposition of coverage because, and I know we're almost at the time, at the same time that Francis is in Asia, we'll be covering also the 53rd International Eucharistic Congress in Quito, Ecuador.
Yeah.
That's where I'll be starting next weekend. Well, we'll be in Quito, and a lot to see, and we're going to be on the ground in both places.
If you need extra help with reporters, just send me. I'm ready to go. All right, I've got the microphone.
You want to go?
yeah, I'll go to Singapore. I'll go to Quito. I would love to. Or maybe you need some coverage in Bali or Hawaii, wherever.
Tahiti.
Tahiti. I'd be happy to go. Dr. Matthew Bunson has been our guest. Hey, if you don't know about EWTN News and you're like, you know what, there's something wrong with the news media, there is good. Like, you don't have to be Catholic to watch. You'll get great news, lots of pro-life coverage, lots of coverage of developing cultures, truly Catholic Christian coverage. Check it out on EWTN. Dr. Bunson, thank you. It's always a great pleasure to talk with you.
It's a privilege to be with you, it really is, and it's a wonderful time as always.
Thank you. All right, that'll do it. We'll see you next time, God willing.